Now, Adolf Hitler is going to obviously be the most recognized face of World War II, and it's really important that we establish a background of this individual. I always like to start with saying Hitler did have a pretty rough childhood, but that does not excuse your actions when you respond as violently and extremely as he did. It's also important to note that a lot of the information that we have about Hitler is either incorrect or just not known for certain. He does wind up dictating an autobiography, and we think that a lot of that is false. Furthermore, once he comes to power, he's going to change a lot of the official records of his life, either exaggerating things or downplaying things. And so there's a lot of discrepancies. We're not entirely sure on some stuff. What I'm presenting as my biography is just merely based on the couple of college classes I took in college and some independent research. So keep in mind that you very well could find alternative information. Anyways, Adolf means noble wolf, so there's a little bit of irony behind that. Here's a couple pictures of him as a child and then him as an adult. He was born on April 20th, 1889, and he committed suicide sometime of the evening, April 30th to May 1st, 1945. He was raised in Austria, not Germany. He was by blood partially Czech, and he was also partially Jewish. And it's just ironic because later on, those would be both groups that he would target during the Holocaust. His father was a middle class servant, civil servant. He was like a ticket taker at a toll booth. And he was very physically abusive as well as emotionally abusive to Hitler and his mom. You'll also notice that Hitler's birth name is actually Heidler Schicklgruber, not Hitler. He will change it to Hitler to become more Germanic, as well as to rid himself of his father. Because Hitler's father was so abusive and was actually very often gone, he would leave for extended periods of time, work, drinking, it's thought maybe mistresses. Hitler grew to be very, very close to his mother, and his favorite pastime was reading. He was a poor student in school pretty much because he didn't like being told what he had to think or what he had to learn. But when he was able to make choices, he loved to read pretty much anything he could get his hands on in terms of ancient history, mythology, theology, philosophy. He actually said that he had read every book in the town library by the time that he was in his mid-teens. And here you see Hitler's parents. His biggest dream growing up was to become an artist. He wanted to paint for a living. So he dropped out of school after just 5 years, and he's going to run away and live in Vienna, which is the capital of Austria. Here he's going to live as a vagrant, which is just a fancy way of saying he's a homeless drifter. He wandered from, hostel to hostel, soup kitchen to soup kitchen, never really knowing where his next meal would come from. He made a little bit of money by painting postcards of landscapes and architecture, and he would sell these on street corners of Vienna. He was a decent artist. Most people say he wasn't very good. Obviously, I can't paint that well, so I say he's all right. But clearly, he was never going to get rich doing it. He also refused to paint people. He had a couple friends that he kind of palled around town with, and later he would say these were the happiest years of his life. Here's a couple of his paintings. So while in Vienna, he decides that he is going to pursue this dream of becoming a professional artist. So he applies to the Fine Art School of Vienna, but he is going to be rejected because he didn't paint people. So he had to kind of rewind and stop and think, okay, what can I do with my life instead? And this time he decides he's going to become a priest. He's going to apply to go to seminary. However, he had been raised more Lutheran than anything, although not super religious to begin with. There was quite a bit about his own theological beliefs that didn't line up with Catholicism. And so when they would ask him questions, he responded in a way that the people at the decision board as to whether he can join the seminary said that he wasn't fit. He went, he studied, he reapplied, and again, he's going to be turned down. Then he's going to apply to go to architecture school, and he was rejected from this as well. In each of these instances, at least one person on the panel that decided his fate was Jewish, and later on he said that these rejections helped to contribute towards his racism against Jews. Um, Immediately following the last of these rejections, his mother is going to die of breast cancer, and he wasn't able to make it home to say goodbye to her. And so he's going to blame himself for his mother dying alone, and he's going to become very, very clinically depressed. This is around the same time that World War I is going to break out. Seeing how he was essentially suicidally depressed and he had no other prospects, he decided that he would enlist in the war and see if he could do anything there. He did not want to fight as an Austrian. He viewed them as weak and secondary to the Germans. And so he snuck into Munich, Germany, and volunteered for the German army. And they accepted him. This is when he changes his name. So how is Hitler as a soldier? He's actually a fairly decent foot soldier, mainly because he had so little to lose that he would volunteer for the most dangerous positions and missions. He would be one of the first guys to run over the top, for example, this type of thing. He was promoted repeatedly through the ranks, eventually earning the U.S. equivalent of lieutenant, so he was a lower level officer. And he was also awarded this medal that you see here, which is called the Iron Cross, which you receive in Germany for valor or bravery. He survived somewhere around 50 different battles. Eventually, he claimed that this showed that he was destined to be a leader, that he was able to survive the horrific fighting conditions of this war. He also is going to make the best friend that he ever had in his life during this time period. This is just like a random side story that I always find interesting. He became very good friends with this dog that ran away. And it just shows that, this really cruel man had this weird soft spot for animals, which I just always thought was interesting. Anyways, I digress. So he was poison gassed twice. The first time it was a relatively low amount, and so he was able to continue fighting. The second time, however, he was temporarily blinded, badly enough that he was no longer able to continue fighting at the front lines. But the German army didn't want to lose such a good soldier, and so they decided to use him in a different means. All right, if you can't fight on the front, what can we do with you? I know, you can be a spy. And so the German army is going to send Hitler to spy on this group that was having meetings in beer halls in Munich, and just to see what they were talking about, because the German army didn't know very much about this group, and they were kind of leery about them. So he goes to this meeting, and he sits down, and he listens. And the group that he spied on was the Nazis. And so this is how Hitler is officially introduced to the Nazi Party. He arrives in Munich, he sits down, he listens to these meetings, and this is right as World War I comes to an end. And one of the things that the Nazis are talking about is that they were upset with who they called the November criminals, which were those German generals who signed the armistice that eventually would lead to the Treaty of Versailles, that, in November 1918, those generals in that boxcar in the woods of France who signed that document ending the fighting and accepting full blame for the war. In the eyes of the Germans, many felt that those generals should have just accepted getting murdered instead of signing away the German fate. As Hitler listened to the Nazis say these things, he realized that he agreed with pretty much most of their sentiments. So eventually one day he's going to stand up in one of these meetings and he's going to make a speech where he concurs with them. And the Nazis were just super impressed with what he had to say and how he said it. Say what you will about Hitler, he is a very, very passionate orator or a good public speaker. So he makes a speech, the Nazis like him, they embrace him, and he's still doing his job. He's still telling the army what the Nazis are saying. It just happens that what the Nazis are saying and what Hitler feels line up with also what the German army says. So he's going to gradually work his way up throughout the Nazi Party leadership. Within about a year or so, he is going to be honorably discharged from the military. This is as the German army has to demilitarize because of the Treaty of Versailles. He was just one of the number of soldiers who was discharged. It wasn't any type of punishment. So he starts looking around and he decides, okay, I'm going to go ahead and try to make something of this Nazi Party. I want to see if I can get some political power. And so he's going to start consolidating his power, which means to bring together as like a unified whole. The Nazi Party of Germany at the time was very, very fractured and splintered. Within Munich, there were dozens of these little Nazi parties. It was just all based in local beer halls. So there's a beer hall on Main Street. One group of Nazis went there. They didn't talk to the Nazis who were at the beer hall 3 blocks over. And Hitler thought that this was probably pretty detrimental towards their strength. And so his idea was to bring all the groups together into one big group. And obviously, since it's his idea, he hoped that he would become the leader. On the morning of November 8th, 1923, Hitler wanted the leaders of all the little tiny Nazi parties within Munich to meet at the City Hall building and to march to his local beer hall to show the people of Munich this unification of the Nazi party. This would allow him to officially proclaim himself to be the leader. That was the plan. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, or fortunately, I guess, depending on how you look at it. What happened was that not very many Nazis showed up. There was actually more people in the crowds than there were in the actual demonstration. Therefore, Hitler and those who did demonstrate were arrested for disturbing the peace and demonstrating without the proper paperwork. So Hitler winds up going to jail because he didn't have paperwork to have a parade. This, nonetheless, is known historically as the Beer Hall Putsch, which means capture or seize. And so this is Hitler's first attempt to take power. And that's why it's historically very, very important. And here's a picture of, some of the images from the Beer Hall Putsch.